with that, I am going to hand it over to today's presenter, Brandon Carson. Brandon is the author of Learning in the Age of Immediacy, as well as today's topic, the L&D's Playbook for the Digital Age. Again, I met Brandon in 2018 at our Learning Leadership Summit. By the way, check out our website and you'll see Brandon's 2018 summit presentation. You'll see components of it there. Brandon is passionate. Brandon is forward thinking, and maybe most importantly, just an all around good person. And with that, I'll hand it over to Brandon Carson.
All right. Thank you, Jay. That's a really great introduction. And I'm humbled to think that you think that. I've really enjoyed my time with Frederickson Learning over the last several years, bringing together some really a great community of thought leaders and learning leaders and learning practitioners. It's been great to get to know you guys. And good day, everyone. It's really good to see you. I do apologize. I flew into Atlanta from California on a red eye last night. I haven't had a lot of sleep, but I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all today. And a lot of what I want to talk about is in this book that I just released. It became available on July 6th of this year. And it's really calling on a reorientation of the traditional corporate L&D structure, so it can be more relevant, meaningful, and impactful as we navigate the largest scale job transformation in human history. So that's just a little bit of setting the benchmark for you, because if you're in the learning world, in the L&D world, that's what you're dealing with. Lots of stuff going on, massive opportunity for L&D right now to help drive our businesses and, even more importantly, our workforces forward as we continue into this really complex digital age and the whole transformation that's happening with work. So I'm really happy just to be spending some time with you today, talk about some of the topics from that I discuss in the book. And I will argue too that another key part of the book is there's 8 contributors from lots of different areas in the industry that have provided great perspectives in this book as well. Much more valuable than anything I added, but I would say that's a bonus for you, is to hear lots of different perspectives across the across the spectrum from an industry perspective, if you will. I would like to also give a quick shout out to an organization that I founded last year as the pandemic started to unfold. It's called L&D Cares. It is a community-focused volunteer organization that me and several other learning professionals established with the aim to provide learning support and growth opportunities for talent professionals. Primarily, we started it as the pandemic was unfolding, like I said, because we thought there would be potentially a big impact on learning and development organizations as lots of the world started to shut down. There was quite an impact. And so our main focus was just to help folks through that transition that they may need to make. But we're still thriving as an organization, and everything about this organization is free to join. We're looking for people who can share their expertise. Join the network if you're so interested. ldcares.org is where you can check it out. And so the main topic of today, which also goes around the book itself, is that L&D is at a defining moment. And it's time for us to take a comprehensive look at our practice, what our priorities are, where we sit in our org structure, who leads us, and what capabilities are within our team as the world around us changes so rapidly. And it's not really just the digital age. It was also coming, and I say coming out of the pandemic. I know we're not completely out of the pandemic, and I know there's lots of things still going around as it applies to the pandemic, which has had major impact on all of us. I mean, I was working at an airline when the pandemic unfolded, and you can imagine being at an airline during a global pandemic. It was quite an interesting challenge, and especially for how we did training, because my team supported the global airport operations, and the majority of our training actually occurred in airports. And so it was really challenging to kind of go through that year. And it's been challenging for all of us, right? As we've tried to figure out a playbook, if you will, not to get too cheesy here, but that's what we did not have, as a playbook for a global pandemic. So I don't know about all of you, but definitely I and my team, we were on center stage navigating the chaos, confusion, and uncertainty that came with that pandemic and brought that to our business. So out of this, and during most of last year, I was at Delta Airlines, and candidly, they asked us if we would not mind taking some time off. And the airport or the airline obviously suffered a lot of business loss. 97% of our business disappeared within 30 days last year. And so basically, we put the airline to rest, and some of us took some leaves of absence. And I did that and wrote this book. And so I took 2 months off, wrote the book, and as the pandemic was unfolding around us, the concept of it came before the pandemic, but that definitely had an impact on the perspectives and on my thinking around L&D in the future. So I'm basically asking us as a practice to create a new playbook. And this one will be one forged not only from what the pandemic brought us, but also one that will move us forward into the digital future, which was the original thesis of the book. And believe me, that has not ceased for us. If anything, it's just accelerated what's going on with the digital age. So, like I said, we had to pivot. We had to do a big pivot. Like I said, our training operation included a significant amount of in-person training, lots of live classroom training in airports around the world, lots of training around live aircraft. The business does not give us an airplane to train on as a mock-up or as a real aircraft. We don't get that luxury, so we train a lot around live aircraft. And so moving that to virtual and figuring out how to continue to qualify and give our workforce the credentials necessary to work the aircraft was a big challenge and was daunting, to say the least. And enabling and adapting to virtual work for our corporate teams was also quite the risk, or quite the task, and had a lot of risk involved with it as well. So all our plans, playbooks, and wish lists were really wiped away from COVID or by COVID. And we went immediately into business continuity mode. It's like whatever we needed to do to keep the operation running was our playbook in the short term, if you will, because we were deemed an essential service to the nation. And because of that, we needed to continue running the operation. And then when you consider the confluence of the digital age and what the pandemic wrought as it unfolded and took over last year, it's not too out there to think that the next 5 years for L&D will probably be more transformational than the last 50. And with that being said, I think there are 3 challenges for us to navigate as we move forward. There's increased complexity, there's exponential acceleration, and a newfound responsibility to our businesses and our workforces as well. So when you think about workplace complexity, it's evolving pretty rapidly. And the fact that our world and our workplaces are going to be even more complex as we move through the shifts that the digital age brings us, we need to traverse all of the complexity and changes that are coming to the enterprise org design. So when you think about, let me see if I can bring up this. Yeah. The workforce is evolving. It's needing to adapt to the fundamental changes in how work gets done. We have shifting demographics. So most of the world is living longer. The US is still behind most of the developed world in lifespan, if you will, but but we are definitely on a trend to where we live longer. We're about to eclipse that 100-year life, which means we're going to have longer careers. And it's not out of the box to think about the 6-decade career that's coming. So when you think about 60 years of a career and the shelf life of skills, how often are you going to need to be reskilling yourself? And so that's why continuous learning is critical for our workforce. There are multiple generations, up to 5 generations working in companies now, and a significant drain going on as well because there's a lot of folks retiring. And so we've got this dynamic with our workforce and the demographics in our workforce that is quite daunting. Like I said, the diminishing shelf life of skills. And then when you take on the fact that we're going to be working with intelligent machinery, software, and robots side by side as work evolves, then we're going to see the rise of teamwork over individualism. And we'll focus more on the employee experience than we ever have before, as the workforce demands more from the companies in which they share labor with, right? And then when you think about it, this is really the big thing here. We have a massive skills gap that has erupted across the world. It's estimated that 70% of all workers will need to be reskilled or upskilled as we continue integrating more automation and digitization into our workplaces. So the biggest shift is really accelerating due to the pandemic as well. Companies are now moving significant numbers of their workforce to operate remotely in distributed teams. And so what are the dynamics there that change for L&D as you're looking at more hybrid types of work environments? And then what's the answer? Is that the return to office? What are companies going to do versus what the workforce demands? So then when you look at the other dynamic, which is business acceleration. So we're facing an acceleration unheard of in business history. So the road we were on before the pandemic was quite transformational. And I think Satya Nadella said last June for Microsoft that they had 2 years of digital transformation that had to happen in 2 weeks as they were trying to enable virtual and remote work. And so business is going to accelerate and continue accelerating even more exponentially in the areas of technology integration, customer experience, and service and product design. It took the telephone more than 80 years to become ubiquitous, right, across our country. It took us just 50 years to connect 2/3 of the Earth's people to the internet. So I always think of Ray Kurzweil, who's the director of engineering at Google. When I think about digital technology, he said, once a technology becomes digital, it can accelerate exponentially. So don't think that 100 years in this century will see 100 years of acceleration. The next decade will see 100 years of acceleration. And so what we need to do is, as L&D, is this will test our abilities to prevent chaos and confusion in the workplace. As leaders, senior leaders, integrate more automation, and I guarantee you, if a task can be automated, it will be automated. And as they integrate more technology into the workplace, it's incumbent upon L&D to really understand how this technology is going to be implemented and leveraged to execute on digital strategies, because it won't work at all if the workforce is not capable of executing on those digital strategies. And so that's where a lot of our CEOs and a lot of our senior leaders have cognitive dissonance, in my perspective, because they're accelerating their investment year over year, especially in artificial intelligence technology. They're spending tons of money in this area, and investment is not on par with corporate training. And so we need to have those discussions with our senior leaders about making sure the workforce can actually deliver and execute with all of these technology integrations going on. This will test our company's ability to succeed in the hyperdynamic business environments, where market share obviously is it's volatile, but it's critical for these companies to be first to market, or to at least be able to be in the market where they need to be. You don't get there without a workforce that can execute on the digital strategies. And then the third was our responsibility. So what responsibility as learning and development functions do we have? I think we have a heightened responsibility to justify further investment in human capital and to bring forward the evidence of the return on that investment. So, we must work and focus on developing a high-performing, more inclusive workforce. We must look at how we embed learning opportunities deeper into the work environment. And in this perspective, I'll get a little bit out of the box when it comes to, and I talk a lot about this in the book, I firmly believe that L&D needs to become much more engaged and involved in the design of the work environments themselves. And if you, I think in the discussion guide that we're going to make available to everyone about the book, there's a link to John Hagel's video where he talks about where we need to really assertively continue this transition from the scalable efficiency work model, where our work constructs and our work environments were created to scale efficiency in the work instead of addressing complexity of the work. We need to move from scalable efficiency to scalable learning. So what we need to do is be much more engaged with the folks who do design the work environments to ensure that learning and the ability to learn while you work is built into the actual systems in the physical environments themselves. And you can see a real good example of this with Apple Park, which is the newer headquarters that Apple built, where a lot of their design methodology was based on connection and interaction between people at work that would help drive more creativity and innovation and curiosity, because it wasn't built on just segregating work teams and work groups together. It was really built to serendipitously enable different work groups to cross paths and have conversations, which is really important for innovation and creativity. We have to start thinking differently about these types of how we embed real learning into the design of the work environment. I could go on for days about that one. We need to look, like I said earlier, we need to forecast future capabilities and enable lifelong continuous learning. That really is a critical component of remaining relevant and driving towards more meaningful work for the workforce. And then we need to, really look at our key responsibility is to focus on the workforce and construct a fit-for-purpose, human-centered L&D operating model for the enterprise. So you'll think that my two books I've written kind of have a perspective of technology, but I don't believe we should ever start with technology when it comes to looking at how we're going to future-proof the workforce. Technology, in my perspective, is a means to an end. Yes, you need to understand it and you need to know what matters in your learning ecosystem, but we have a unique opportunity right now as we're in the formative stages of this job transformation to ensure that we continue to design human-centered work environments and human-centered capability, and make sure all of the machinery, the intelligent machinery and the robots and the software do the work we need them to do and take away the rote and burdensome work from humans and give us the ability to do more of what we're great at as humans. So this is why I'm calling for a new playbook for the digital age for L&D. And so I'd like to share with you further some thoughts on how we can formulate this playbook and fold it into our overall learning strategies. The book itself has kind of a template of how you can go step by step through that if you've never done one of these types of playbooks before. So to reorient ourselves, I think there's the 3 R's that are our imperatives. We need to reset, rethink, and rebuild. And by reset, I'm saying we need to adopt new practices for how we design and deliver learning experiences. Even through the crisis of the pandemic, the initial chaos, like I said earlier, our training operation didn't cease, and most did not. Many teams found themselves, however, needing to quickly create virtual training strategies when they were required to abandon in-person physical training. And a lot of that had to happen just kind of overnight almost. We were on a trajectory there, but we were not far enough along to where it didn't become chaotic, frankly, at first. But going forward, we have an opportunity to take this reset and decide what aspects of this are permanent. What will we keep and what will we discard from the rapid changes we made last year? When we think about rethinking, our mission, our vision, our operating principles need to reflect the evolving needs of the business and the workforce under the new operating models that are being constructed. So this is a call for a ground-up review of how we're funded, where we sit in the organizational structure, how the audiences we support best learn, how we, as the learning professionals, best learn our practice, and the skills we have on our team. And what I like to call the known unknowns as we move forward. We need to inventory those as much as we can. I have supplied, I'll have a link to it at the end of the presentation today, a crowdsourced document that sort of lays out some of these known unknowns as well as some of the other areas around funding and operating models and positioning and capabilities. I'll link you to that document. You can add to it, but you can definitely download it and take it away because there's a lot of good stuff that's been crowdsourced over the last year. It's been up for about 1.5 years now. And then the third is to rebuild. The third R is rebuild. So the L&D team needs to be rebuilt by expanding its capabilities for increased digital learning. You should be thinking digital first, more and better virtual facilitation, learning analytics, and coaching and mentoring, to name just a few. We need to think about a multidisciplinary L&D team. We need to think about expanding beyond just instructional design and providing more support in employee health and wellness. And also, like I said earlier on my little soapbox, embedding learning into the design of the work environment itself. In a lot of ways, what I'm saying is the L&D function needs to become the business strategy. I don't say we need to align to it anymore, frankly. L&D is the overall business strategy that matters the most. And that means having more visibility to the senior leadership team, directly reporting to the CEO if possible, the COO, but definitely having more access to how the decisions are made, especially about investment in technology versus human capital. Those really need to be much more of a unified conversation. And your learning strategy should never be a separate artifact from the business strategy. It should be part of the business strategy itself. So that's what I mean by rebuild. These are big, hairy, audacious goals, but this is my belief in that we're now being asked, a lot of us are being asked after last year to stand up and come forward and bring some of this bold visionary thinking forward. So what do I mean when I say learning is the business strategy? So think about how fast the business moves towards digital maturity. But what's the number one dependency on the business when it comes to achieving digital maturity? It's the workforce and its ability to execute on the digital strategies every business is formulating. And right now, your CEO is not confident that your workforce has the skills to perform. So every company has embarked on a reorientation of their strategic direction. And that centers around digital strategies. That train's left the station. It's unsustainable to not be reorienting L&D with the business. If you're not already moving in that direction, it's very late for you. Easily half your workforce is already skills deficient. A quarter of them may need to be displaced if they're not able to reskill or upskill quick enough. Automation is still on target to impact the workforce significantly. In just the next few years, The work hours performed by intelligent machinery will match the time spent working by humans. And this is where, like I said earlier, this is where the majority of business investment is occurring, in areas that increase automation. Business leaders have said that this will cause a reduction in the human workforce. So this is a daunting challenge we face, because although the majority of corporate leaders fear the capability of their workforce, they're still not significantly increasing investment in L&D on the level that will accommodate the reskilling and upskilling of the workforce that needs to meet the demands of the digital business strategies. That's just not happening yet. We have seen an uptick in investment in L&D over last year, but it's still not in parity with the other investments in technology and business strategies. So I think only the companies that embrace the digital age and appropriately prepare for the journey will survive and thrive. To successfully navigate our workforce and our business through the twists and turns as we evolve through the digital age, we must embrace three fundamental principles. So the first one is understand that technology will accelerate at an exponential and often uncomfortable pace. I hate to say it is what it is, but it's kind of one of those things, right? To keep our businesses competitive, L&D must be willing itself to rapidly test new technology and leverage it where appropriate. Your business is doing this. You must move rapidly away from the one-size-fits-all training strategy you have, especially as it applies to e-learning. Bring in technology that moves you towards hyper-personalized adaptive learning. You have technology available to you that will bring learning to life, that will bring learning to life for your audiences based on their own individual needs. Every role at every level on the L&D team must have technical acumen. Not everyone's a data scientist, I get that, but every company is now a technology company. That capability must be reflected on the learning team. McDonald's has a technology infrastructure that would amaze you, and that's to sell hamburgers. Look at Starbucks. They are revolutionizing the customer experience with their app. So why are we not able to use similar technology to build the same consumer-grade learning experiences for our employees? And then we need to reframe existing problems based on advancing technology. You're creating too much training content. Leverage technology, especially as it applies to algorithms, to curate relevant content that already exists in the enterprise. L&D spends only 8% of their time curating. Why are we creating more content? Technology should help you refrain from becoming a content factory. Invest where appropriate in a manner that drives scalability and speed to market. You need consumer-grade learning experiences in days to weeks, not weeks to months. Remember when Amazon came up with free delivery? We were all shocked. I remember it. How can they do that? Then they offered 2-day free delivery. And now they're asking us just to let them come in the house and put the package in our refrigerator. When I was at Home Depot, what kept us up at night was the fact that we knew other companies were going to figure out how to get a washer and dryer to someone installed in an hour. And that will happen. So businesses are moving fast. We have to move as fast in L&D. And we still, the thing about L&D is we still have to get it right the first time to market. And then we need to place a high premium on practicality in the application of technology to solve real problems for our employees and our customers. And I primarily say customers here, though. It's really the employee that's your customer, obviously, but a competent and confident employee gives you that satisfied customer. And then understanding that new business practices must accommodate the rapid pace of change. Companies will be faced with reorienting themselves to accommodate new work models. We are undergoing a massive transformation in job architecturing right now. And we are looking at every job architecture and re-credentialing it to remove the need for a higher education degree. And the entire business has to be on board to support that. So new work models will emanate from not only the pandemic, but the digital age as we continue, and also to drive a more equitable employment situation. The focus on individualism will reduce to give way to more team-based work. So communication, collaboration, and other key skills that we used to term as soft skills, I now call them essential skills, those will become more important. People will be doing more of their work in teams. And like I said earlier, we need to get much more involved in the configuration of the work environment. We know that most people learn how to do their job while doing their job, and we need to move toward embedding learning into the workflow, like I've said. The physical and digital systems need to be more conducive to learning. We need to know deeply how the work gets done. That's L&D's one of their key jobs. We need to know what barriers and constraints there are to getting the work done. I'll guarantee you, as John Hagel says, most of what you train a frontline workforce on is not what they encounter during a normal day, for example. So we need to be embedded in the work environment itself and know what happens there. Leaders at every level must realize that as the company evolves its business practices, work is going to grow more complex. So strategies need to evolve quickly. And that's one reason why I've put this book together as a playbook. A playbook is similar to what coaches create for their teams. And a playbook may change frequently. Guess what? You're going to have to be adaptable and flexible. We have to have that as part of our strategy to accommodate quick changes, or what I refer to as emerging needs, because our businesses are going to have those. And we definitely saw that last year during the pandemic. And then a comprehensive culture of learning is required to extract the quality needed from a high-performing workplace. Skill shortages in the digital age are massive, and the company has no choice but to try and build capability within its existing workforce. Our education system is built on a 300-year-old model that the Brits gave us, and it is really focused on templating an army of workers for manufacturing types of jobs. It is not bringing forward the type of workers you need to execute on digital strategies. It's not going to be able to change. The education system won't be able to change fast enough to give you that capability coming in. So you're going to have no choice but to build a lot of it. A lot of it won't be available to you to buy on the market. So what are you doing now for reskilling or upskilling your workforce? Many of the skills, like I said, don't exist within the confines of the company. And in some areas, they don't exist at all. And it's even more difficult to build your strategy on the idea of buying talent on the open market. Like I said, it just may not be realistic. We must align to these principles and make the changes necessary in our functions to operationalize a true culture of learning. So we must take inventory of how our functions operate, how it measures value, and what capabilities are required to ensure it effectively formulates digital strategies that correlate to the business. Many of today's corporate learning organizations still operate under the same system designed for a world where only a few could be taught at a time. Classroom training still makes up half of all formal learning delivered in a corporate setting. But the typical L&D function is faced with a number of challenges in how it provides measurable value to the business. The skill sets, the processes, design models, and methodologies all need to be questioned, along with, like I've said, the very structure, scope, and span of control to meet the business head on. L&D now more than ever must be the primary function that ensures the high-performing workforce is ready to create high-quality products and services. That's your key deliverable, if you will, to your organization. So, and I know we're all struggling with the realities of everything that hits us on a day-to-day basis, but these are some of the things that we need to have to reframe our value proposition. So there are three critical and necessary requirements to frame that or reframe that value proposition and to really drive what I call business value, right? Because that's what we're all about, is driving business value. And that also means doing the best we can to provide meaningful work for our workforce. But the first one is investment in L&D must increase. And I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, But this is the message we have to take to our senior leaders. And I just had a conversation today with a leader in in a business segment who said, yeah, we need a lot of training, but we don't have any investment opportunity in it. And I'm like, those two things just don't correlate, right? Most CEOs are significantly increasing investment in technology, like I said, and AI is leading the way. Artificial intelligence across so many organizations, just lots of investment being made there. And like I said, the majority of those same CEOs are not significantly increasing training in the workforce on the parity with they are on technology. And then the funny thing is, the conundrum is those same CEOs are significantly worried about their workforce capabilities. And too often the learning team is funded based on a headcount model with program level needs. And furthermore, many senior executives underestimate the capability of their current workforce. They don't really know if their workforce has, or the key part, can acquire the necessary skills to execute on these strategies. If we look deep and peel back the layer of this onion a little more, it's gonna get a little scary, if you will. There are really two types of workers right now. There's the physical worker, which is focusing most of their time on rote tasks and manual labor. And then there's the cognitive worker, which spends most of their time focused on non-routine tasks. And the chasm that exists between those two types of workers is growing immensely wider year over year. And you can see that in some of the wage gaps and in some of the challenges with the labor model across the spectrum. There's something like 9 million available jobs for people, and not near enough people are showing up for those jobs, because after the pandemic, a lot of people are questioning what they want out of work and finding alternative methods to meet those needs. So that is a challenge that if you're not already faced with it, you will be in your organization. And my fear is a lot of those reskilling needs for the physical worker to close that chasm between them and the cognitive worker is something that may not be able to be done. And so then that means a significant number of people don't have any options for them in the workforce. And so that's where when I talk about an equitable work environment, think about how we need to start, as a part of our playbook, we need to start structuring and formulating strategies that will help build that capability and close that chasm between those two types of workers. So there must be investment in training and new skilling. In too many operations, we are seeing the strains of last year brought to business. We see it in the supply chain. We see it in customer service. We see it in the areas around health and safety. And then the second part of this new playbook, if you will, is to look at, is for L&D to proactively respond and lead this workforce skills pivot. It must be, for this to be successful, L&D must be repositioned in the enterprise. It must be moved into or have access to the strategic planning process, have its scope and span of control broadened so that it is involved in the overall work planning, and have a direct line of reporting and accountability to the CEO. We got that formulated at Delta before I left Delta, where our CEO, Ed Bastian, talked about how Delta needed to become a learning company. And we got a direct line to him with our skilling imperatives that we were undergoing. New skilling for your L&D team is necessary as well, so that it can move beyond just preparing the workforce for the job shifts, but also consult with the business on workplace reconfiguration. And then the third part is rescoping L&D. The most significant impact of the digital age on the workforce won't be the number of jobs lost, but on the ability of the workforce to execute within the new parameters of work. Traditional job architectures are already outdated. They're prohibiting the business from acquiring and retaining the best talent. As all jobs across the enterprise are re-architected, L&D must be involved to ensure the job requirements align to the dynamics of how the work actually gets done. Job roles can't be simply rewritten on paper. They must be completely reimagined, and the environment in which the work occurs must be rescoped as well. A significant number of job roles, like I said earlier, will involve humans and machines collaborating together. So L&D must determine how to best train both people and machines to work together. Reconfiguring work must occur, and it must involve us. The new job architectures will break the mold of the traditional skills-based work model based on individual capability and focus more on insight-driven, multi-skilled roles driven by teams that must actively collaborate to get the job done. Critical in re-architecting job roles is determining how to allocate tasks between people and machines. And we're well positioned, I think, to keep the focus on the humanity of work in this process. That's why we should be involved in these discussions, because we really, more than anything, represent the human capital, if you will, across the organization. The senior leaders should see L&D as a trusted partner in this process and rely on them to ensure the workforce's voice is not lost in translation. So lots there, even more on reskilling. It's a core capability of any organization to offer reskilling opportunities to their employees. Talent pools, like I said, are getting smaller, not bigger. You need time to transition the workforce to the capabilities needed. I firmly believe we're in a state of crisis as we must migrate millions of individuals to new skills. Companies must now include individual development to attract the top talent. Employees are not interested in joining your company as a closed talent market. You have to have an open talent marketplace now. They see their skills as marketable and as openly available on the market at all times. Employees do still see reskilling as a shared process between them and the company, but they expect the company to invest in their development. They now expect the company to offer individual reskilling opportunities before layoffs. And although technology has forever altered the world of work, we're not facing a revolution of work itself just yet. We're facing the acceleration of a shift in how work gets done. And that's kind of an important, subtle, but important differentiator. The rapid dissolution of current processes, tasks, job architectures, and compensation as we collectively know them are beginning to alter expectations of how we work. And we can kind of see that going on in real time now in the struggle that a lot of companies are having to fill all these open jobs. And so I see the confluence of the pandemic, technology, and employee expectations is disrupted all processes, thereby changing the economy of work. What is being created is a new digital labor economy, and the disruption cuts across every industry. Change will not come as incremental alterations to which business can easily adapt, but rather fundamental, potentially destabilizing transitions that will require substantial investment, agility, and new strategic thinking. So the fundamental truths in front of us, I mean, this is a positive thing. I don't want to sound too, apocalyptic here, but we do have a fundamental truth. L&D must act to develop and execute the transition to digital now. While it may take 10 to 15 years for technology such as AI to significantly impact most industries, the infrastructure is what's being put into place. And we must put in the infrastructure necessary to reduce the skills gap and prevent massive job losses in an uneven distribution of capabilities. And we want to close the inequity gap that exists in almost every company. So every L&D team should be devising its digital skilling strategies to ease the transition and become the strategy that business and the workforce needs. And that's why I'm calling for this new playbook, which there's a more tactical outline of how to put this together in the book. But these themes I discussed today are the broader themes that are driving us to need to be able to not create a 5-year learning strategy. I never do that anymore. I do not have a 5-year learning strategy. Most businesses can barely have a 5-year business strategy today. I have a 3-year playbook, and that playbook is really built on flexibility and adaptability to change as the business is changing. So here's the thing. It's a fundamental human trait to work, and people will always be finding new and imaginative ways to get their work done. It wasn't too long ago that people were paid to spend their day sitting in an elevator, making sure other people arrived at the floor they needed to get to. So work constantly changes. Too often we overestimate the changes that will occur within just the next few years, and we underestimate the changes that will occur in the next decade or two. But as the digital age continues to unfold, L&D will need to become a honeycomb of ideas and innovation, a place of invention and creativity that provides the training and resources for a workforce that must deliver more complex products and services to a rapidly changing world. So it's now time to formulate our new playbook for the digital age. I've literally got a template here for one. If you can, I believe you can still access it at that link, but also that collaborative document that I call Changes Needed in L&D for the Digital Age is available at that URL as well. And we can share these out to people as well. And then I just want to thank you for letting me get on my little soapbox today about what we need to do as a practice and how we need to evolve our training organizations going forward. But if you do want to further the discussion or have any more, if you have any more feedback for me, there's my work email, and then there's my LinkedIn address as well.
And don't go away quite yet, people. We've asked 4 of our learning leaders to do a preview of Brandon's book, and they have put together some questions for him. And we're hoping we can get through the 4 in like the next half hour. And Helena, I'd ask you to come off mute, and ask the first question, please. I just said Helena versus Helena. Sorry about that.
There we go. Hi, Brandon. Thanks so much for your presentation today. It was, making me think a lot about our own organization. I kind of wanted to step back a little bit. Capability is a word we see a lot in learning and business contexts, and it's also one that's throughout the book. Our organization would say, yeah, we've got core capabilities. It's manufacturing and product creation and that. I was wondering if you could expand on what capability is to you and how it differs in human, team, and business contexts.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you. Here's the thing. I see someone's capability as the competencies they possess to deliver on whatever their role is or whatever the strategy is for where they're working, right? So the competencies they possess to deliver on the strategy. What we need to, in my opinion, what we need to help people develop is what's referred to as vertical development. Many of us are historically well positioned to train across the horizontal skills, which are kind of the knowledge and skills you need to perform optimally in your role. But as the world of work becomes more complex, we need to focus more so, I believe, on the vertical development, which is helping to develop a growth mindset and to build capacity to help people adapt and navigate the complexity that the future of work brings. And so when I think about, that's why I use capability so much versus skill or even versus knowledge, because work, as more rote and burdensome tasks move away from humans, what's left is going to require more critical thinking, more influencing, more negotiation, more relationship building, more capability to look at the broader architecture or framework or the broader goals, if you will, that need to be met. And then how do you help do that working within teams and with others? And so that's why I kind of lean on that word, because those are competencies that, if you look at what the World Economic Forum has put forward as the skills of the future of work, it's really all an agglomeration of these types of capabilities, right? So that's how I look at it. I don't know if that helps. But.
No, it does. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, Kim from the Federal Reserve, would you please ask Brandon your question?
Happy to, and thank you again, Brandon. As you're thinking about, the sort of the shifts to digital age and technology, I think about that in terms of our own business, right, in L&D. And one of the things that we've been struggling with is how we create more of a broader learning ecosystem and looking at learning and develop no longer in its own silo, but trying to look at critical partnerships like with human capital and how we can integrate our respective technologies to create a more seamless employee experience. I'm just curious if you have some examples of where you've seen this done well. What are some of the barriers to getting there, and what advice do you have for us in overcoming those barriers?
Yeah, you're spot on with where your thinking needs to be, in my opinion, on this, because we definitely need to rethink how we look across the talent landscape and look across the entire career life cycle. And that's something we had started at Delta, was to figure out how we didn't have a really big attrition problem there, but we did have a career mobility challenge and a career mapping challenge to give people opportunities to reach beyond what they may be doing. And trends analysis and feedback showed us that at about 8 to 10 years of tenure, there was kind of this trough of despair as it applied to their sentiment around what is my career here? What are my opportunities? And so I think to really get to that point where we do that assessment of the talent landscape in a meaningful way that's valuable for people to be able to, move within the organization and figure out how they want to advance their career, we need to integrate HR and learning in much more in many places than we do now. And so I think the lens we obviously need to look through is from the individual's perspective, the talent perspective. So an integrated talent framework will open opportunity for the individual that may have been difficult for them to see. And it will ease the process, I think, of identifying strengths and opportunities, the hidden gems that are there in the workforce that aren't visible to you. And we hear stories over and over. The president, at the time I was at Home Depot, the president of Home Depot started her career there as a frontline worker, as in the front end of the store as a cashier. And she ended up being the president. And obviously the questions are, how did you navigate that journey? And her response was always that she got a lot of help from people who recognized something in her and gave her more opportunity, right? So a key barrier to, having an integrated talent framework is it lies in how we procure and implement our talent systems, but it also lies in how we develop leaders to be able to connect to the individuals on the team. So she got to where she is because other leaders saw or recognized something in her, and it was a little bit serendipitous, right? It wasn't planned. And so this is critical as companies need to do more to retain people, and they need to offer advanced development opportunities and build a deeper bench for succession. And I bet most of us here are challenged with our succession planning. Too many companies are failing to provide even the most basic career plans for their people. When it comes to a learning ecosystem, I like to think more organically. I like to think around what's called learning ecologies. Every organization has its own unique perspective when it comes to what they define as a culture of learning. But the ecological metaphor I like because it takes into consideration the context in which individuals learn. So when I say an integrated framework, I kind of mean all of those things. Like even in the organization I was just in, everything was separate as it applied to a system around how we do all of the talent assessment. And it really caused a lot of confusion, in recognizing how you're going to help someone build their career path. And so I think that's part of our fundamental need, is to reduce those barriers that we build up because of the silos inside of organizations. The biggest thing we can do, I think, to help answer your question is try to integrate our talent frameworks as much as possible. And I know that can be difficult when you have all of these organizational structures that are barriers themselves to that. but we have to start being the voice for sanity, I think, when it comes to that. We were, a couple of examples around that line is at Home Depot, we did have a separate L&D organization and a separate talent management organization. And then we, at one point, we integrated them together so that we could start looking at the overall employee experience life cycle and take that into consideration more. And so you'll see a lot of movement there with L&D organizations integrating more into the talent management function of the business as well. I think that's critical. Hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you.
Okay, next. Julie, how is one of our founding members of our Young Learning Leaders Forum? Your turn to ask a question.
All right, thank you, Jay, and thank you, Brandon. This has been so interesting. So I want to ask a question about decision making. You talked a little bit about this being part of the business strategy. We all know that, right? But decision making is definitely a big part of how work gets done as well. And there's typically a hierarchy in which decisions get made. It depends on a lot of things, including who holds those decision-making rights. So my question is, with those new work archetypes that you mentioned, teams, responsibility, autonomy, and creativity, how does an organization ensure that decisions are still made, or are made, I guess, timely and consistently, and that they connect back to the larger organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that autonomy is a challenge for a lot of organizations, especially hierarchical ones, and we have an operating model in business that is really based on Fordism and that came about in the early parts of the last century. And I think that we need to evolve our operating model in business as work becomes more complex. We need to evolve it to not react, but to be more proactive to what's going on in work. And you'll see a lot of this, I say chaos and confusion sometimes, but you see a lot of this hierarchical challenge, if you will. You see a lot of this in a lot of organizations where I sometimes compare it to like the Soviet Union in the 50s, where you have to go to the Politburo and get 500 people together to make a decision and have all this, negotiation and back and forth. And it really does hinder the ability to move fast. I'll hear lots of folks say speed wins. We've got to, speed to market, all of these types of things. But if we're not willing to look at our operating model from a work perspective, then I don't know how we can, arm individuals to be able to help drive that. And I think that's where this new archetype revolves more on relies more on teams rather than individuals. And so if we empower teams, and I'm seeing this in pockets of L&D organizations. There's one in general where a new learning leader came into this organization, and he's not from learning. So I was a little bit wary of this because he's not a learning person. He came over from the customer success group, and he set up a completely agile L&D function made up of smaller teams of 6 people who those teams had complete autonomy to drive solutions within the functions they were aligned to. And, this is where we see critical skills that we need more development on in the areas, like I mentioned earlier, relationship building, influencing, negotiating, working with and through others. This is really critical for team-based work. A complete move away from relying on individualism is probably something we will see go forward as these organizations need to become more flexible and agile to keep themselves competitive in the marketplace. So that's why this archetype starts with a T, about teams. Collaboration, communication, creativity are really needed as well to be successful in team-based work. And that's where this decision-making process needs to be empowered across these dedicated work teams. This will afford them the ability to see a direct correlation to the impact their work has. But there is also the R, like you mentioned, there's responsibility. So if we empower teams to make more decisions, they need to understand and accept the responsibility of those decisions. And that goes across the leadership hierarchy as well. And so to your point, a lot of leaders are challenged with delegating decisions to teams. I did it in my last job. I didn't have a big organization, I had about 60 people, but I empowered the teams within those 60 to what I used to say is run your business. Go do what you need to do. I'm here to reduce the barriers for you. I'm here to help make sure that, to your point, things don't go awry, and that there is some kind of at least understanding of what the decisions are you're making, the prioritization that you're making. But it only works when the teams are committed and understand their responsibility. So I think that's important. And that may be a new skill or a new competency for some people. The connection to the broader strategy of the enterprise, though, is part of that responsibility. So the teams need to be connected to the strategy. They need to know how other teams are impacting it. And in some ways, this is a huge paradigm shift, Julia. It's not, it's culturally different. And it could recognize and be looked at as a significant shift in how work gets done. But this top-down decision-making process, I have an example, and this was several years ago. I was at Yahoo, and we kind of know what happened to Yahoo. They were already on the downward slide when I was there. And one of the key reasons why, when you look at Google and some of the other technology and social companies that were there, part of the decision part of the challenges they had were getting to market quick enough. And one of the key challenges there was decision making. And so back in the day, we had this product that a startup came out with in 9 weeks. So a startup went with an idea to a market solution in 9 weeks. We were working on a similar product within Yahoo, and we were taking about 9 months to go to market with it. And so I asked a bunch of product managers in a training I had once, I'm like, how can we be competitive when we take 9 months to go to market versus 9 weeks? And if you're number 4 or 5 to market, you don't matter anymore, right? You have to be in the top 3 in this particular space. And one of the engineers responded that, we build cathedrals, we don't build churches. We have 1 billion people, and they may have 10 million that they're serving. So it's more impactful when we go to market with something. I get that, I understand that, but you have to have, in today's world, you have to be able to build that cathedral and do it in 9 weeks. And so how are you going to do that? You've got to change your work archetype. So sorry, I kind of went on a rant there, but I think this is a fundamental shift, Julie. I think that it's a challenge for every company out there right now.
Yeah, that was absolutely great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. David Lusk, you're next, please.
Hey, Brandon, good to see you again, man. Great talk. Loved it. Really love how L&D needs to be the strategy of the business, a long passion of mine. As we think about, in the book, you called out L&D's role being a human first as we integrate technology into this. And one of the challenges that L&D faces is chronic under-resourcing. So it's just hard to get the resources to deliver. How does the digital transformation impact this? Is it an enabler or an inhibitor to it?
Yeah, I mean, that's the fundamental question. And I think we were on an even more difficult trajectory before the pandemic. And I think, candidly, even at an airline, we didn't have a playbook for a pandemic. The government barely had one, right? And so I don't know that too many organizations had one, but it did at least expose some vulnerabilities. And that's really one reason why we're having this conversation today. It exposed that vulnerability in how we're skilling our workforce and how we're thinking about, like, how many of us in L&D organizations, how many of us have an R&D function within our L&D function? How many of us are really trying different things? And there are some great pockets of this going on. I see it in several organizations, and investment has increased because of the pandemic, but it still does seem that a significant number of L&D functions are trapped in this cost center model where they're funded based on their headcount, or they're funded based on projects or programs. And worse, if a senior leader decides to do something, whether or not it should be done, then you get investment to do that thing. And it's disarming, and it's annoying and frustrating that we are not more of a center of excellence to really drive a lot of these things and be ahead of it. And I think a lot of that is candidly the folks we put into leadership positions in L&D and in HR, and what our, their ability to have a message that matters to those folks. So I think that's fundamental. We have to have more. I remember Eric Schmidt said once at Google, he hires for two things: persistence and courage. And if you've got those two things, he'll find a spot for you at Google, right? And I don't know how many times you guys have interviewed for a job in L&D, but it's this like ridiculous long process of just bulleted items of things you're probably, are irrelevant at best, right? And so that's the key thesis for this whole conversation, the whole message in the book. We've got to reset, rethink, and rebuild. And we've got to be bold enough to start having these conversations with the people that matter in our organizations. In the next 5 years, 6% of the workforce will be displaced. 1 in 2 workers are going to need to change their skills to remain employable. We desperately need a bench of leaders that can navigate the business. What are you doing with leader development? Are you doing real leader development? What conversations are you having around succession planning? How deep is your bench, right? And how many conversations are you having around that? Work, as we know, I've said a million times, not going to get less complex. Products and services are becoming hyper-personalized. Customers expect even more out of the pandemic. The curbside pickup has become the #1 highest rated service in retail now, and people expect that to stay. And they expect people to come and put things in your refrigerator for you and pick up the returns off your counter. They expect you to bring their stuff to the curb. They expect you to have it ready for them if they decide to go in or drop it at your porch. That's a more complex operating model in which to work under. So we're going to have to invest more in talent development. We're going to have to see talent development as a critical enabler of all of these things that are shifting. Some get it, some are getting it. And sometimes our narrative needs to change, and sometimes how we tell our stories need to change, like to the earlier question about capability and customer experience, those types of things. I think if we just tweak our message a bit, we might already have an open door with the senior leaders.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, Brandon, I'm surprised that you answered all of those questions so quickly.
I can kind of bloviate a little, so I'm sorry for going on a little too long.
No, you did great. It means we actually have time for one last question if someone wants to jump in and ask it.
Yeah, throw it out. Give me a hard one.
Anyone want to jump in and ask one last question? We'll leave it open, or we'll just ask one.
Give me a contrarian one.
Oh.
Yeah, well, there is, Jamie mentioned sort of reporting on ROI, right? And I think that's critical. We've got to look at how we drive our value, how we show evidence of our value, right?
I do have a little bit of a contrarian one for you.
All right.
All right. I come from a trades background, and it's interesting to me to see how often these discussions seem to drive right past the trades field. So, and I'm sure you haven't, I'm sure this is in your thinking, but I'm thinking about the people putting the stuff in the fridge, driving the trucks, still building the buildings. Can you comment about that, how that integrates with this whole rethinking about how business is put together and how those, I just have a lot of questions. I'm not really being contrarian. I think this is an awesome presentation, by the way. But can you share a few thoughts about some of those physical jobs that are going to remain and how this fits with that?
Yeah, I mean,
thanks.
It's a great question, and actually this would be a really good discussion, Jay, that we should think about as a panel discussion among some industry experts, because there are some critical capabilities, right, that we need to rebuild, to think about as the future of work evolves. Not everything is a cognitive. I mean, there's the physical worker and the cognitive worker, and those worker types will remain. It's interesting, though, to note that every every level of worker from now on will integrate with technology to get their job done to some degree, right? But there is a skills polarization. And so it is a fundamental problem for us to solve. But the key driver to some of this is the inequity that's there when it comes to education. And you've seen over the past several years, the tech companies started with it when they really couldn't find the talent. And I used to work at tech companies, and some of the interviewing, I ran the engineering program from a training perspective at Yahoo. And some of what engineers had to go through to get a job there was kind of ridiculous. And so we're seeing this re-credentialing going on, and this need to not necessarily have a degree, but this need to bring your skills forward. And so I think that chasm between that physical worker and cognitive worker it's broad and it's significant, and we have a major a wage gap that's significant. So how do we bring back that, or how do we more develop that opportunity for people who can't go a traditional education route, but who can also have meaningful work that's relevant? And I think that's going to shake out based on the burdensome tasks and the manual tasks being moved away. An example of that at Delta, we were looking at, you push back an airplane to get it from the gate to get it ready to take off. That's a person who sits on a tug type of vehicle, connects a bar to the plane, then sits on it and pushes the plane back. And for about 45 seconds to a minute, has complete control of a $200 million plane with 200 people sitting in it, including a pilot, right? That's a significant responsibility. Well, we were testing automated pushback systems, and lots of electric vehicles running around the ramp around the aircraft, taking away some of that rote work that goes on. And so those types of things will go away, and less error will be there, or different type of error maybe. But then how do we take those workers who have years of experience doing that and give them something else to do? So I think it's a little bit of a tangent on your question. There are certain trades, especially as it comes to plumbing and electrical and these types of things, that are going to become even more important as we have to continually rebuild the infrastructure. They will become more technology enabled, though, in a lot of ways. I meet with a lot of electricians who are like, okay, they've got to really understand the latest in technology and all of that. So reskilling is not necessarily moving you from one thing to another. Now, can you reskill a coal miner to become a programmer, a Java programmer or something? Maybe, sure, but it's probably going to take time, because it is what it is to learn a new skill. So I think there's just some nuances there that we need to focus on. But what I like, and what I'm seeing now in a lot of corporations, is more discussion about how do we break down the inequity that's there, and not focus so much on credentials, but focus more on skills. I think that'll help with that. But I think you're right. This is the bigger. If I was to put anything forward from this conversation, this reskilling imperative, this is the largest scale job transformation we've ever been on. This is not the agriculture to the Industrial Revolution. This is bigger than that. So, sorry.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you very much.